Welcome back. This is the Dawning Podcast's Alternate History series, part 2 of 5. If you haven't already, please check out part 1, called Introduction. Today's episode is called The Roots of Anthropology. So back in the day, you have people who were doing field work, who were really more treasure hunters than scholars. People like Schliemann and Belzoni. Here's an excerpt from Brian Fagan's Archaeology, A Brief Introduction. Egyptian antiquities were so exotic and valuable that they commanded enormous prices in Europe, where the newly founded British Museum and the Louvre in Paris were competing for sensational exhibits. For the best part of a century, the Nile Valley attracted a remarkable procession of adventurers, treasure hunters, and scientists, a classic case of villains pitted against heroes. Some of the tomb robbers were flamboyant characters, such as circus strongman turned archaeologist Giovanni Belzoni. From 1817 to 1819, Belzoni blasted and tunneled his way from one end of Egypt to the other. He searched for papyrus inscriptions in mummy caves where, he reported, "I contrived to sit, but when my weight bore on the body of an Egyptian, it crushed like a bandbox." He sank down among the broken mummies with a crash of bones, rags, and wooden cases, and had to wait for a quarter of an hour until the dust settled. He found the empty royal tomb of Pharaoh Seti I, who reigned from 1291 to 1278 BCE, in the Valley of the Kings near Thebes, and he was the first person in centuries to penetrate Pharaoh Ramses II's spectacular temple of Abu Simbel. A tall man of immense strength and considerable charm, Belzoni was an expert with levers, weights, and gunpowder, essential qualifications for an early 19th century tomb robber. He left Egypt precipitously in 1819, after a fracas with his enemies in which shots were fired, exhibited some of his finds in London, and perished while searching for the source of the Niger River in West Africa. I find that YouTube is rife with Belzoni-like dude bros going to exotic locales instead of the library. Let's pause for a moment. Some level of exoticism or fetishization of non-Western cultures is, I don't want to say unavoidable, but it's certainly an easy trap for Westerners especially to fall into, thanks to our imperialism. But with alt history travelers, there's almost this air of taunting the countries they visit, as if they're telling the locals, "Finally, an expert on your culture has arrived." In my opinion, they're really no better than Belzoni, because they're going to these places not to engage with the locals or to appreciate the art and culture of those locals and their ancestors, but to cherry-pick details they encounter to further their unscientific and frankly dehumanizing theories. What they seem to propose is sort of an echo of what they're doing. The people living in this quote-unquote exotic locale in the time and place in question, according to the dude bros, could never have created the majestic technological wonders these dude bros are coming to look at. Instead, the dude bros, suggest that instead of the ancestors of the locals, it's people who look like the dude bros who must have come and done it 9,000 years ago, or that they taught the locals when they got there. It always comes down to the culture of that time and place could never have done this. What they're inherently suggesting, whether they're aware or not, is that the locals are lesser mentally than the dude bros, and the dude bro or dude chick is kind of suggesting they are these mystical, advanced civilizations reborn, returning to the site of their own magnificent work to again tell the locals the secret knowledge. Dr. Miano of World of Antiquity, in his video called Historian Reacts to Evidence for Ancient High Technology in Egypt, at 2 hours, 50 minutes, and 30 seconds, for about 40 seconds, says, "There is nothing remarkable about ancient Egyptians being able to achieve accuracy on the level of the statues that he's showing on the screen at this moment. It's impressive, but nowhere near impossible. Give the people some credit for Ptah's sake." I love that. So according to a guy named Richard Popp, whose work we really dive into in part 3, says, television has become the principal means by which most people learn about history today. That was in 2006. I'm hoping that YouTube is not taking the place of television, but it's definitely more popular today than it was in 2006, and people definitely come to YouTube to learn history. Here's another quote I want to share. "In documentary projects, scratched and worn Holocaust photographs are often preferred in media accounts over clean versions. By displaying the visual tropes expected of old photographs, reenactments lend a sense of authenticity." Another quote here. "These aesthetic decisions serve a number of functions. For one, they help to lend a sense of historical authenticity. Perhaps more importantly, they help to stimulate the audience's sense of historical imagination. Seemingly immersed in the event as it looked at the time, the viewer is better able to imagine themselves as witness to history." There's an article I read called The History Channel Effect by Jeremy D. Stoddard. Quote, "Historian Robert Rosenstone explains that documentary films are more problematic than Hollywood films, as historians, journalists, and the general public are more trusting of documentary films because they resemble written history more than feature film. As a result, students of the general public don't apply the same critical eye as they do when watching an historically inaccurate Hollywood movie. Viewers who suffer from the History Channel effect are unable to recognize the value-laden ideological perspectives in most documentary-style videos. They believe that all documentary films are objective and neutral sources of historical information. Teachers reinforce the view of documentaries as accurate and trustworthy when they fail to ask students to critique what they're watching. Unlike Hollywood feature films, documentaries are often treated with the same reverence given to primary historical sources. I want to share with you an important critique of modern anthropology. Rather, it was written in 1989, but I feel that it's still applicable. It's from a piece called Representing the Colonized by Edward Said. Quote, "To practice anthropology in the United States is therefore not just to be doing scholarly work investigating otherness and difference in a large country. It is to be discussing them in an enormously influential and powerful state whose global role is that of a superpower. The fetishization and relentless celebration of difference and otherness can therefore be seen as an ominous trend. It suggests not only what Jonathan Friedman has called the spectacularization of anthropology, whereby the textualization and culturization of societies occur regardless of politics and history, but also the heedless appropriation and translation of the world by a process that, for all its protestations of relativism, its displays of epistemological care and technical expertise, cannot easily be distinguished from the process of empire. I have put this as strongly as I have simply because I am impressed that in so many of the various writings on anthropology, epistemology, textualization, and otherness that I have read, which in scope and material run the gamut from anthropology to history and literary theory, there is an almost total absence of any reference to American imperial intervention as a factor affecting the theoretical discussion. It will be said that I have connected anthropology and empire too crudely, in too undifferentiated a way, to which I respond by asking how, and I really mean how, and when they were separated. I do not know when the event occurred, or if it occurred at all. So rather than assuming that it happened, let us see whether there is still some relevance to the topic of empire for the American anthropologist, and indeed for us all as intellectuals. Said here is criticizing anthropology's practices as an obsession with exoticism that never establishes its own reference point as one of colonizing or imperialist power, that for all anthropology's talk of letting a culture speak for itself, it's still a Western power that hands that culture the microphone. While this script was in production, I stumbled upon a list of tests to identify conspiracy theories. I found them insightful and applicable to my thesis about alt history, so I got permission from the author to share it. Number 1, the profit test. Is there a concrete profit motive? A real reason why the purported culprit or culprits would benefit financially or personally from taking part in the scheme? Number 2, the possibility test. Can it be explained by science? Is there a known physical, real mechanism accepted by the scientific community by which it could be done? He says here, no supernatural crap allowed. This test is really important. I agree. Number 3, incompetence test. Could it be done by a real group of people? Imagine for a moment that the supposed conspirators were replaced by people you know in real life. Would they be able to do it? Number 4, group size test. Does it avoid requiring a large number of people to keep it secret? Large groups are incredibly leaky / suck at keeping secrets, he says. Number 5, adverse motive test. Is it impossible that the person telling you the theory would benefit in any way from you or people believing in it? If they could benefit from it, and from lying to you about it, there's a good chance they're lying. Number 6, source test. Does it come from a source which is respected and known to be reliable? Do they have any legitimate, provable credentials that could explain how they found out about it? Does anyone respectable trust them? Number 7, efficiency test. If the theory includes a more efficient or cheaper way of doing something, are businesses or corporations using that method on a large scale? For example, water dowsing would definitely be used by corporations if it worked, he says, because it would be so much cheaper. But they don't use it, which is good evidence it doesn't work. Cold fusion clearly doesn't work. Otherwise, we'd definitely be using it for power already to solve climate change. Number 8, dependency test. If the theory were true, would everything we do in the modern world still be possible? For example, the world cannot be flat because ships and planes fly around the world on a pretty regular basis, and satellites can be seen orbiting. Also, gravity would be partly sideways on a disk world, which it clearly isn't, and to cap it off, astronauts and all trustworthy field experiments know the world is round. Number 9, secrecy test. If the thing is supposedly secret, is there actually a concrete reason why they would actually benefit from or need to keep the thing secret? And if there is it even possible for someone to find out? If someone is claiming to be the discoverer or whistleblower, see test number 6 again. Number 10, internal consistency test. Does every part of this theory or idea agree and work with everything else it says? Is the story entirely consistent? Does the story stay exactly the same when you ask questions or talk about it again later? So if someone tells you that the moon landing didn't happen because the government is lizards, but the next time you ask, they say it's because the government is horse people, then you know they're probably feeding you a load of crap. I like that wording. Okay. Number 11, Occam's razor test. Is it the simplest explanation? And does it best satisfy the above criteria out of all the possible options? If it isn't or it doesn't, it's probably not true. This was written by Red Fifth, and I have included their SoundCloud page in my description. In particular, I enjoy the songs Marionette's March and Antisocial Media, so go check them out. Thanks so much for letting us use this. Anthropologists, then and now, are not without fault, but the establishment of the scientific methods employed by anthropologists today helps mitigate the faults and preserves the in situ status in their records for posterity. An archaeologist destroys a site when they excavate it, but they do so with documentation first. You can't excavate a site without destroying it, unfortunately. But when you have that documentation, other people can study that documentation and come to their own conclusions. If you destroy a site without that documentation, the context of the things that you've found or the things that other people find later is jeopardized. And it's harder for us to get an accurate picture of what those things meant to the people that used them. The science of anthropology and archaeology has evolved from common tomb robber to a respectable science over the years. I look on the History Channel of the past with rose-colored glasses. I know that I do. But if you take anything from this part of the series, please take the idea that you can't take documentary as fact. Check the sources. Check my sources. To end, I'd like to share a quote by Granieri. If there is a lesson that scholars and policymakers should draw from history, especially the history of the past century, that lesson is the need for humility, both before the human capacity for mistakes in the past and before our own ability to make new ones. Humility does not promise control. It encourages reflection and circumspection, and if scholars hope to be of service to their societies, we can never have enough of either. If I could take just a moment of your time, I'd like to direct you to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Palestinians in the last 2 years, in addition to the pandemic, were hit with 2 severe blows. Not only had the United States at the end of 2020 endorsed Israel's invasions and war crimes and thus become an active party in the invasion and attacks on Palestine and her long-suffering people, but Palestinians lost one of their longest-serving diplomats at the end of 2020. Syed Erekat served Palestine for 30 years, working for a 2-state solution. Once he passed away, former United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo went to the West Bank and said that Israel's invasion settlements are not only legitimate, but those protesting against Israel's illegal occupation of Palestinian territory will be labeled anti-Semitic, and that imports from those illegal settlements will be considered legal Israeli imports in the United States. Boris Johnson in the UK at this time was trying to pass legislation echoing Pompeo's words and intent. After losing their important ally in Syed Erekat, Palestinians are losing hope for official support, one country at a time. If you have the means, I encourage you to donate. Even $1 is more than nothing, and if you cannot afford that, sharing a link is a great help. Please see the top link in my description. Next time, part 3 is called Fake News, Fake Facts, Fake History, where we look at an article that takes a deep dive into the format of the alt history programs that push their audience's minds away from evidence and toward sensationalism. Thanks so much for listening to the Dawning Podcast. I'll see you next Friday.